Hello everyone, my name is Ian, you're watching Big Rock Moto, your home for the most detailed motorcycle reviews on the net. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and if you're new here and you like this content, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Now you may have noticed that there's definitely a trend in the adventure motorcycle world to go towards smaller, lighter, more affordable bikes, and you may have also noticed that a lot of adventure bikes have gotten crazy expensive these days. So Honda North America has been very generous, and they've agreed to lend me this bike, the CRF300L Rally, for a 6-month long-term test. This bike really hits the sweet spot for a lot of riders. It only weighs about 330 pounds fully fueled up, and it comes in just around $6,000. So during the time I have with this bike, we're going to make a series of videos with it. We're going to start out by testing the bike's abilities just the way it is. That's going to be today's video, testing the bike in stock form. Then, with a budget of just $1,500, including luggage, we're going to see just how good we can make this bike with aftermarket upgrades. Then, to test the outcome of all that, we're going to go on some, 2 or 3 day adventure camping trips, off-road trips with this bike. And then, of course, we'll conclude the series and sort of see how we did building this bike up and see if I'm still happy with it after all of that. So here's what you can expect today in part 1 of this series. I'm going to show you the riding position. I'm going to show you how it is to lift the bike up when you drop it over. I'm going to take you on a tour around the bike, talk about the specs, show you the bike's features. Then we're going to take it out on the highway, see how it works at higher speeds. We're going to take it off-road on the trail to see how it does on the trail. We'll come back here, we'll briefly discuss the pros and cons, and we'll wrap up with some final thoughts for this part 1. So with that, let's go for a ride. Okay, let's take a look at the riding position, seat height of this bike. So 35-inch seat height, but because the suspension is so soft, it's actually not that bad, and the seat's pretty narrow. So let me jump on here and kind of show you. So there's the riding position. You can see plenty of foot room, plenty of leg room. Handlebars in a very comfortable position. Really don't have any issues with the riding position on this bike. And I am 5'10", 180 centimeters tall. I weigh 200 pounds or about 90 kilograms. I have a 32-inch leg inseam. And because the suspension squats down so much, in stock form anyway, you can see just how soft the suspension is. It's kind of fun to do that. It feels like I'm on a bouncy house or something. Anyway, I can flat foot on both sides at my height. So even though it's a pretty tall bike on paper, it's not quite as bad as that in real life. All right, so now you know what we got to do. We got to do the drop and lift test. So let's lay the bike down here. Okay, there she is. Those handguards definitely don't look like they're going to hold up very well. So let's go ahead and get the bike lifted up. And that's how not to do this. Well, you know what? Things happen when you're doing these kinds of bikes, adventure bikes. So it was a good test. I did scratch the bar end guard or bar end weight on this side. Everything else looks fine. That was a pretty hard drop. So, hey, unplanned test. There you go. And it held up just fine. Now we're going to put handguards on the bike so that it's not quite as dangerous in the future. And remember, when you're lifting your bike, it's better to put the bike in gear so it doesn't roll. All right, what do you say we take a tour and talk about the specs of the Honda CRF300L Rally? All right, let's walk through the specs really quick. So the price on the Rally is right around $6,000 US. I think it's maybe $6,100, somewhere right in there. They keep increasing it a little bit every year, just like everything in the world right now. Oh, the sun decided to come out, okay. So I guess we're gonna be hot. The engine is a 286cc liquid-cooled double overhead cam engine. And with the 300, it puts out about 10% more power and torque than the 250 engine did. It was an increase of about 30 to 35 cc, so not as big of a jump as you might want to see. Putting out about 27 horsepower at 8,500 RPM and 19.6 pounds of torque at 4,750 RPM. And of course that's hooked up to a 6-speed transmission, and I think it does have somewhat of a slip or assist clutch, sorry, a slip feature in the, a slipper assist feature in the clutch. Let's look at brakes and suspension. So the suspension, you've got Showa suspension, so the front is an upside down fork. You've got just over 10 inches of travel, so a lot of travel for a bike like this, but there's absolutely no adjustments on the front, and it's very soft, as we're about to find out. On the back, on the rear shock, which you can see down in here, this is an item that's actually going to get changed out during my build, but what you have is a monoshock. It does have some preload adjustment, but it's kind of hard to do, and you've got about 10 inches of travel there. So the Rally model has bigger brakes than the standard 300L, which is something I found out when going over the specs. So you've got a rotor that's about 296 millimeters, and you have a nice twin piston caliper there. And of course, you've got your single rear disc brake. The 300L Rally wears pretty skinny tires, so it's an 18-inch rear tire, but it's only a 120 width. You can see kind of skinny looking there. And then in the front, you've got an 8100 21-inch front tire. And of course, you've got spoke wheels, and they do have tubes in them. We've already talked about the seat height. That's around 35 inches, which is very, very tall, but with the soft suspension, it tends to squish down quite a bit. Fuel capacity, 3.4 gallons on the Rally. So quite a bit more than the standard 300L. That's one of the reasons you would get the Rally, in addition to all this cool looking fairing here. And that gives you a fuel range of between 150 to 200 miles, depending on how fast, how hard you're riding. This bike is very efficient with fuel. And of course, we got to talk about the weight. So the curb weight, fully fueled up, is around 335 pounds. Okay, I was absolutely dying there in the sun, so move to the shade. Let's take a quick tour around the bike. You can see the large rear license plate holder. This is a common thing that a lot of people end up swapping out. Incandescent turn signals, tail lights there. You can see here, it'd be nice to kind of have a cargo rack here. We might be doing that if it's within our budget. Stock exhaust. Foot pegs, you can see the stock foot pegs. I've taken the rubber out. We might just stick with these stock foot pegs to keep within our budget on this build. You can see the brake lever here, which looks kind of cheap. Looks like it's something that definitely could bend. You can see the oil fill there. Let's see, passenger pegs do fold down here. They're attached into the subframe there. Of course, you can see the Rally model has this extra plastic fairing, which there's not much weight to it. It's you know, pretty thin. There's not a lot going on, but it makes the bike look really cool and gives you just a touch more wind protection. You can see the radiator under there. You've got this plastic skid plate here. So I don't know how good that's going to be for serious off-roading. Coming around to the front, let me turn the headlights on. So we turn that on, you can see you have LED headlights, high and low beam, pretty cool design. And you can see a pretty good sized windshield here. Front turn signals, you've got these basic handguards. We are going to be swapping those out. Now you can see the windshield from this side. GPS bar here to mount GPS or phone, whatever you want to do. Really, really appreciate having that. Very kind of budget handlebar setup, control setup, but we're going to be rectifying that. You can see fuel fill here. You just put the key in to get gas. And yeah, no suspension adjustments, so there's not too much else to see here. The dashboard, so what you have on the dashboard, fuel gauge, tach, speedometer, different trip odometers. You can go trip A, trip B. You've got a timer, odometer. So this bike has just under 500 miles on it. And you can also, what I like here, you can track, see I'm getting 66.5 miles per gallon the way I've been riding, and it tells you how much fuel you've used on this tank, which is very, very valuable. That might even be more valuable than a fuel gauge, because you know if it's 3.4 gallons and you use 0.7 gallons, you know exactly how much you have left, and I find it to be very accurate. So great feature, I love seeing that. And you have a gear position indicator as well. Another thing I like, a lot of budget bikes don't have this, but you get four-way hazard lights, which is really nice to see. Even my super expensive KTM doesn't have that. I think with that, it's time to get this bike out on the road. All right, let's get this bike out on the road and then hit the trail. It is super hot today, so we're going to try to keep this short and sweet. So let's see. The first thing I notice when I get on is that, you know, it initially feels tall when it's on the side stand, and you sit on the bike and it feels like I'm really low to the ground. I can flat foot this bike on both sides. So let's fire this thing up. Honda always starts, you know, just very smooth, very quiet. I've actually ridden this bike. I've had it for a while already before filming this. I've actually ridden it quite a bit and really come to enjoy this little machine, other than the incredibly soft suspension, almost comically soft suspension, which we're about to find out. So we've got enough gas. One thing that's great about this bike is you have a 6-speed gearbox. So what that means is that first gear is pretty nice and low. and I appreciate that. And then on a highway you still have a pretty nice cruising gear. They did a great job with the gear ratios. I really do like that. Now this view should be familiar to those of you who watch Norley on Itchy Boots channel. She's currently riding this bike all over the place in season 6. Love her videos. She's a great YouTuber, a great motorcyclist, great travel blogger. So anyway, back to this bike. One of the first things I noticed when riding it is just how quiet and smooth and refined it is for a dual sport bike. Most dual sports aren't quite like this, and it's kind of interesting to have this much wind protection on really what is kind of more of a dual sport if you look at how the chassis is set up. This has way more suspension travel, ground clearance, and bigger front wheel than most of the small adventure bikes that I've tested lately, like the 390 Adventure, bikes like that. So let's wind it up a little bit. There's quite a bit of wind noise on my helmet. The buffeting is not terrible. It's not shaking my helmet. I'm wearing the Cryos Pro like I do in all my videos. But there is quite a bit of noise. But overall, I think the stock windshield does a pretty good job. And you know, overall, the street manners of the 300L Rally are very, very good. The engine doesn't really vibrate until you get to the very highest RPMs. Handles well, doesn't feel too big or heavy. The brakes are adequate. They're not amazing, but they're definitely adequate. Roll-on power, so 4,000 RPM in 6th gear, 40 miles per hour. So that's what I want to point out. If you're used to watching Itchy Boots, her speedometer reads out in kilometers per hour. My speedometer is miles per hour, so it's a very big difference here. So 40 miles per hour is probably something like, I don't know, 70, 75 kilometers per hour. If I roll on, it's slow, like it just slowly picks up. This would be very, very friendly for beginners or people who, you know, maybe are just getting started in off-road or adventure riding. It's a very friendly power delivery. And then if you want to accelerate a bit faster, you just have to downshift and let the engine sing up to red line around, I think it's around 9 or 10,000 RPM is the red line. Let's take this corner here pretty good. Yeah, it's a very fun bike to ride, you know, because it's just so small and agile. The suspension, I can already feel there's just so much like bobbing up and down, like almost like I'm on like a boat on the ocean. With the suspension, it's just so floaty, and we're going to get to that here in the off-road section. That's full power, full throttle, going downhill. 70, 73, 75, 76. So in my testing of this bike and the standard 300L, the non-rally that I had, I found that around 75 miles per hour is kind of your average, maybe top speed on level ground without a bunch of luggage or a headwind. If you get a headwind, you know, you might be below 70 miles an hour. If you have really favorable conditions, you might be looking at 80 miles per hour. But in any case, you're not, where I live here in California in the USA, the freeway traffic moves between 80 to 90 miles per hour, and this bike cannot keep up with that traffic. I'm just being very brutally honest about that. I've tested it, and in the real world where you have wind and you have luggage and maybe the air filter might be a little dirty or something, you know, you're not going 80 to 90 miles per hour on this bike. So that's one of its major limitations. But if you're riding mostly back roads, just like Itchy Boots does, she tends to stick to roads like this or dirt roads below 70 miles per hour. It's an amazing bike and there's nothing wrong with it. Just don't expect it to go at those higher speeds. I really like the dashboard, really nice big readout. This is the best dashboard of any dual sport bike I've ever used. The next one might be the DRZ. The DR has decent information, but I mean this, you get the tachometer, you get the fuel gauge, you get a gear indicator. I really like having all that stuff. One thing you will notice about the Rally is that you see if you can see my knees here, because the tank kind of flares out on the side to give you more capacity, your knees kind of are more angled out a little bit. It's not like some dirt bikes or dual sports where the bike feels super narrow between your legs. It's not really a big deal. It doesn't really seem to matter, but just something that I noticed, and that you're probably going to notice too if you ride one of these or buy one of these. In terms of the riding position, is very comfortable, very neutral. No problem with that. The seat comfort, the verdict is still out, or the jury is still out on that. I need to ride this bike on an all-day ride, an all-day tour, to really give you my opinion about the seat. But riding it for, you know, a few hours at a time like I've done, it's been okay, but I don't know if it's going to hold up to all-day touring. Okay, full throttle acceleration, we're at a slight uphill, and we're at 5,000 feet above sea level. You know what, that's not bad for being uphill and high elevation. Let's turn around and run that downhill just to give this bike the benefit of the doubt. So you're not going to, you know, win any drag races with this bike, but you know, the power, it is what it is. I think it's going to be enough for what a lot of people are going to use this bike for. All right, off-road test of the Honda 300L Rally. Let's go. Oh boy. Oh, okay. Whoa. Okay. So a few things that you're going to notice if you take this bike off-road. Now keep in mind, I weigh 200 pounds. I'm not Norley from Itchy Boots. I'm 200 pounds, about 90 kilograms. So I'm a good sized guy. Now the bike right now is totally naked. There's no luggage on it. Now I'm not naked, thankfully for everybody, but I'm wearing riding gear. But I don't have any luggage on the bike. The suspension is comically bad. It's the softest, most undersprung, underdamped suspension that I've ever experienced on a motorcycle. It makes the Royal Enfield Himalayan look like a KTM suspension. But even with that, the bike is still a ton of fun to ride, and it's not intimidating at all. It just feels kind of like an enduro bike with a little bit of extra, you know, stuff on it. But I would not hesitate to take this on single track or tighter trails. So the way that the suspension is going to affect you is that when you hit any bumps at all, the rear suspension just bottoms out right away. It just crashes into the bump stop. Like on almost every one of these bumps, and I'm riding pretty slow. On every one of these bumps, I'm just bottoming the bike out in the back. The front is also soft, but it doesn't seem to be as severe as the back. Now in terms of handling, the handling feels very agile, nimble, predictable, stable. I really appreciate that. These tires are not the greatest. I'm going to be swapping these tires out during my build. Surprisingly, the bike has, if you ride in like second gear, keep the revs up a little bit, it has just enough power and torque to like slightly brake the rear wheel, slightly brake rear wheel traction, and just give you a nice little bit of a of a throttle steer, but you have to really use the throttle pretty aggressively in order to do that. Ooh, a little jump there. Yeah, the front end feels like it's just washing out all the time. I think it's this tire. And the overall effect that the floaty suspension has, it just makes the bike not handle really well, because the chassis is just going like this the whole time, like a boat bobbing in the ocean, and it just doesn't lend itself to riding faster. So that's kind of the off-road first impressions. It's like the potential is there, the capability, I can feel that it's there. I just need a little stiffer suspension, a little bit better tires, maybe a couple of other tiny tweaks to the ergonomics, and man, it's going to be an awesome bike at that point. And you get the dual sport capability, but you also get the touring capability with the wind protection and the larger fuel tank and the ability to carry luggage. And it's low maintenance, it's reliable. What is there not to like, really? So with that, okay, with that, ow, let's get back to the studio. All right, we're back. So pretty fun ride out there today, despite it being one of the hottest days of the entire year. Now, what are the pros and cons to this bike, at least in stock form as it is? So we've kind of gone over all these, so I'm going to gloss through these. The pros. Number one, it's Honda. I think that kind of goes without saying. Quality, reliability, you know, just every day it's going to start, it's going to run, it's going to get you where you need to go, and in many people's case, especially if you watch Itchy Boots, around the world just fine. Another pro is that if you're looking at this as a long distance adventure travel bike, it's one of the lightest there is. There really isn't anything quite exactly competitive with this if you look at the weight of this bike. So I think that's a really cool thing. Another pro to this bike is it's pretty comfortable. It's got a pretty good seat, it's got a good fuel range, you can ride for longer distances. It's got quite a bit of wind protection. If you consider it more of a lightweight adventure bike or a dual sport bike, you know, pretty good windshield. So I think it's kind of a very unique combination of features, and I see why so many people are clamoring to get their hands on one of these. So what are the downsides to the bike? So I'm not going to get super technical, because I could point out some small things like they went to a welded on subframe when they went to the 300. There's a few nitpicky things, but we're not going to get into all that. But the main things that you care about, number one, I think it could use a few more horsepower if you want to travel at highway speeds here in the USA where I live. It's just a little bit underpowered for that. It's kind of right on that border of being able to maintain 75 miles per hour. So the jury's kind of out on that, but I think maybe just a touch underpowered. And of course the suspension, we've talked about that, we've shown that. The suspension is comically, hysterically soft and really not very usable for the average size male rider riding average speeds on the trail. Now for lighter riders or people riding a little bit more slowly, it could be acceptable, but there are ways to definitely improve the suspension on a budget, which we're going to be doing. All right, now finally, let's give you a little bit of a sneak peek, a little appetizer of what we're going to be doing to this bike. So I'm setting a budget of $1,500 because I really want to keep this as a budget build. There's too many adventure bikes that are just crazy expensive with all the parts that you put on them. So we're going to keep it to $1,500 US. And what I'm planning to do is a suspension upgrade, at least on the rear suspension, swap out the whole rear shock. We're going to upgrade the tires. We're going to put on different handlebars and handguards, and we're going to get a full luggage system that you could carry a lot of luggage for camping or long distance traveling. So we're going to be doing all of that, and I think we can stick, fingers crossed, we can stick within a budget of $1,500, but stay tuned to find out. So what are my final thoughts kind of on part one of this series? I think the 300L Rally is a very exciting, very promising motorcycle, and it would make a lot of people happy in stock form. However, it's sprung for somebody who weighs approximately 80 to 90 pounds, and I don't even know anybody who weighs 80 to 90 pounds. So we're going to have to address quite a few things there with the suspension, obviously. But I think overall, because of its comfort, its wind protection, its fuel range, its lightweight, its low cost, the reliability, it's an amazing, compelling package, and there's really nothing else quite like it. So I'm super, super excited to delve into the series, to do the upgrades, to go on these longer rides, and to really see, is this the bike that you all are hoping that it is, based on all the comments that I've seen out there? So questions, comments, concerns, anything, put that below in the comment section of the video. Other than that, if you've enjoyed this video, please support Big Rock Motor, and there's ways to do that in the description below. Besides that, please ride safe, and I'll see you out there.